There it is. A pine cone stuck in my wheel.
It's been a while since I reviewed Falls Creek, and it's one of the first reviews I did when I started this channel, so there are some things I'd like to revisit. It's not obvious on a surface level even what's so appealing about the Falls Creek Trail. We'll need to talk about that. The most common strategy mountain bikers employ when they ride this trail is to shuttle to Oldman Pass, ride up the McClellan Meadows Trail to the horse camp, and then descend Falls Creek, which ends up being an 18-mile journey with about 1,200 feet of climbing and 3,200 feet of descending. Let's talk about the shuttle approach first, since it's what most people do. But before we do any of that, if you want to support informational content like this, please navigate to patreon.com/voiceovertrails and toss me some support. First, drive past the turnoff for the trailhead and continue up the Wind River Highway until you get here to the super secret trailhead. It's not really super secret, I'm telling you about it right now, so obviously it's not a secret. This is where you'll leave your retrieval vehicle or start the ride if you're pedaling up the hill. Starting here saves you the hassle of driving the potholed road to the trailhead or riding it back to the highway on your bike with all the other cars. Now, just to make sure there are no unpleasant surprises at the end of your bike ride, come over here and check to make sure that the log we used to cross the river is still there. If the log is still there, proceed with the shuttle. From the parking area, drive up the Wind River Highway to the Oldman Pass Snow Park. There is a big parking area there. Cross the road and jump onto this trail referred to in Trail Forks as Falls Creek Section 1. This trail starts out with a nice descent to begin your ride. This is just a nice, mostly smooth and sandy trail that eventually bottoms out at a wet area and then requires a little bit of climbing to get here, the intersection with Forest Service Road 3053, where you'll take a right. The 3053 starts out relatively mild, but the majority of the climbing you'll do, if you're shuttling, is going to be on this road and the McClellan Meadows Trail together. Follow this trail for about a mile up until you get to here, to the bottom of the McClellan Meadows Trail. This is where a lot of the most difficult and technical climbing is on this ride, and it is also where the majority of the climbing is. You did some of it on the road, but you're going to do most of it on this trail. Some of these rock gardens are going to be challenging for beginner to intermediate riders, so take note of that and remember to wait for your friends on this climb. This is also why if you're shuttling, you should bring a full suspension bike. A hardtail won't be an advantage here unless you're doing the trail as an out and back, which I'm going to talk about later. After about 1,000 feet of climbing through a few different climate zones, the trail finally intersects with Forest Service Road 65 just above the horse camp. Coast down the road to the horse camp and begin the descent here at the top of Falls Creek Trail. Now, hold that thought. We're not going to descend yet because there's another way to get up to here if you like climbing. For those of you who aren't interested in hearing about the out and back and just want to get to the descent, skip to the 10-minute mark. Let's go back to the bottom parking area and talk about how you ride this trail without a shuttle. The ride I'm going to detail here is the exploration and adventure route, and it involves a lot of climbing. 3,200 feet to be exact. I recommend a hardtail or at least a lightweight full suspension for this if you're going to do it as an out and back because there is all that climbing. I believe you should know what all your options are, so I'm going to show you a route that veers off the main trail a little bit so that you're not just going up and down on the same section of trail. There's plenty of more objective focused ways to approach this, but I want to give you an idea of what you can do up here when you're all by yourself or when you're with your adventurous friends and you just don't feel like shuttling. Follow this old road grade for about a mile until it veers to the left here. By the way, whether you shuttled or pedaled, you're going to exit this way. Continue to the left until you see these strategically placed logs that act as markers to keep most users on the main line. These are a courtesy to our fellow trail users, so please don't remove them. The climbing starts out relatively flat here on the lower section of the trail, but as anyone who's ridden this knows, it doesn't stay that way for long. But if you're letting the upcoming steep section be the reason that you don't ride this as an out and back, I want you to know right now that you're missing out in a big way. Already, you should be noticing how pretty these woods are. And this lower part is just the beginning. The higher you go, the steeper it gets, but also the gnarlier the forest gets as well. It just keeps getting better and better as you get the opportunity to notice more and more about the woods here that you might not have paid much attention to if you were just shredding down this thing the last time you shuttled it. And right here is where it starts to get steep, about 2.5 miles in from where you parked the car. This isn't the worst of it though, quite the contrary. There's plenty more to come. If you listen carefully when you get to this intersection with a snippet of hiker-only trail, you can just start to make out the sound of Falls Creek Falls, which is located at the end of the hiker trail just down the mountain. It's a beautiful waterfall. go check it out sometime. But you're not interested in the waterfall today, you're interested in getting to the top of the trail, so continue to the left. The steepest portion of the hike begins here, and really this climb is something you should stop freaking out about. If this is the reason you've never ridden this trail as an out and back, then you're really missing out because it's like a quarter mile of hike-a-bike and then it's over. Seriously, it's not as much climbing as you think it'll be. And almost as soon as it began, the most miserable part of this ride is over and you haven't even gotten to 1,000 feet of climbing yet. Once the trail obtains this plateau, it flattens out quite a bit for the next couple of miles without gaining significant elevation. Basically, what you've just done is climbed up the side of the canyon to the top of Falls Creek Falls, and that's why that hill was so steep. All of this topography would be more obvious if there wasn't so much thick forest, but you're basically on a plateau up above the canyon now. This is also where a lot of backpacking campsites are located, right on the canyon rim. And the primary destination for most of the hikers is here, Bubble Falls. It's a pretty nifty little waterfall with a decent swimming hole just downstream. On most days, this is likely to be the last place that you'll be dealing with a lot of hikers, as most people hiking above this section are lost. The rest of the trail above Bubble Falls does not go anywhere interesting enough in a short enough distance to really make it worthwhile for hikers. That works in our favor as mountain bikers. It's flat again just above the falls, but it gets a lot rootier. If you're on a hardtail, you'll notice this. This gradual climb here is also where my elevation finally rolled over to 1,000 feet. Not bad for being 5.5 miles in. This bog right here is one of my favorite spots on the trail, as long as I'm wearing sufficient insect repellent. It's clear if you poke around that this basin gathers a lot of silt and sand that falls out of the water column as the creek slows down. This section of route waterfalls you'll be climbing up is one of the funnest sections of trail on the way down. It's a lot less steep on the way up than I would think from descending it. It's not nearly as bad as it could be. And right here is where you get to make a decision. To the left is the new alignment of the Falls Creek Trail that was built by a partnership between Northwest Trail Alliance and the Southwest chapter of Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance. More on that later. To the right is the old alignment, now abandoned for the last 5 to 7 years, that basically just connects a bunch of old road grades and pretends that it's a trail. And that's just perfect for what we're trying to do, which is just get to the top of the hill while exploring as much as we can. This abandoned section of trail basically traverses the edge of the valley directly below the ridge line that the new trail sits on. It's just old logging roads, but it also makes for some pretty rewarding gnarly forest exploration in case that's your thing. It's also an easier climb than clawing your way up that ridge line. This snippet of trail, or roads, or troads, is definitely abandoned as it's getting pretty grown over in places. But if you're a gravel grinder just looking to explore and you never rode this trail before the reroute, you're going to love this. The old trail is still visible right here near the end of this road grade, but it is fading pretty quickly. The tread has already gotten crispy with accumulating twigs and pine needles, and a lot of this felt like riding my bike through a car wash. What surprised me about this abandoned trail was that there wasn't any blowdown blocking the corridor. That leads me to wonder if some stealth trail fairies aren't sneaking up here and secretly keeping the corridor open. Regardless, there is a lot of vine maple and alder growing straight across the corridor in places. The forest in here is really quite lovely. And eventually the old trail turns into a road again, and you'll pop out right here, where the old trail and new trails meet at Forest Service Road 67. Now here's where I'm going to turn this ride into a gravel grind. It's perfectly valid to climb the trail here, by the way. It's just that this is also where riders coming downhill encounter the most shreddable section of trail, so if you're out of their way, that's nice of you. And by now you're likely getting pretty fatigued anyway, and there is a lot of hike-a-bike over lava rock if you're going to climb up the trail this way. So I'm going to talk about another way you can get to the top that just lets you cruise up a gravel road and avoid all that trouble. So turn right here and travel down this gravel road for a mile or two. This is pretty flat, which means it's really potholed. This road is an absolute nightmare to drive a car on, and you should avoid that at all costs if you can. But this road is not at all miserable to ride a bike on because you're single track. Hooray! You are, however, only halfway through the total elevation gain at this point of the ride. When you get to this intersection with an interesting looking old road, don't take the bait. That road just goes to the bottom of McClellan meadows, so you would be doing all that climbing all over again. After 1.2 miles of relatively flat road with some downhill, you'll encounter this intersection with Forest Service Road 65, where you'll want to turn left. This is a mile or two up the road from Panther Creek Falls, which is where most of the people who find themselves driving on this road are headed. The remainder are going to the lava caves, which I'll talk about in a minute. For the first 3/4 of a mile, the road is flat, traverses through wet green forest, and is riddled with potholes. Seriously, this place is hard. on suspension. I'm starting to understand why I don't see many horses on McClellan Meadows or Falls Creek anymore. I can't imagine hauling a horse trailer up here. After the first 3/4 of a mile, the road then smooths out as it gets steeper. You'll pass 2,000 feet of climbing somewhere along this road or the trail if you decided to go up the trail, as the grade gains 650 feet over 2.5 miles until arriving here at the horse camp, which is the high point of this ride, and right back to where we started. It is, of course, required to stop and have lunch at this picnic table. Okay, here is the descent we've been waiting for. It was a lot of work to get here, but now's your chance to enjoy it. Things start out a little chunky up here at the top with some chewed up trail and a couple of very distinctive water crossings, especially when it's early season. Now, if you're shuttling this, you definitely want full suspension for this descent, but if you're doing it as an out and back, it's kind of a toss-up. In this case, I chose to ride a mid-fat hardtail, which definitely saved me a lot of torment on the climb with the trade-off of a slower descent. Keep in mind that this is what I call bureaucratic descent, meaning there are some transfer climbs in here that you'll have to complete. Even though you're now at the top, there's still about another 400 feet of climbing to go on this descent. Anyway, once it gets going, it's good. This is a blue trail with the ability to make it as black as you want, depending on how you choose to ride these features. The hardtail wasn't too much of an impediment on these descents. It's just important to keep speed up if the sightlines are open, because there's a specific speed this trail wants you to go, and if you're under that speed, it really beats you up, especially on a hardtail. It's kind of like the stagecoach that way. The descent starts getting good right after this road crossing. This is where things really pick up speed, and the tread starts getting gnarlier with lots of rocks poking through the surface and 1 to 2 foot step downs. The more comfortable you are with your wheels off the ground, the better your experience will be on this descent. Learn to bunny hop. The more bike control you have, the better. There are a lot of things to get your bike up and over on this trail, so the better you are at getting your bike up and over things, the more fun you'll have with this descent. There were a few spots here where I definitely missed having my full suspension bike, but then again, having a hardtail really let me practice picking some lines and relying more on bike handling to get through things. Beginner to intermediate riders will find themselves needing to dismount in places here near the top of the trail. Remember that when you're taking your friends on this ride, especially if you're shuttling it with your beginner friends. Eventually, this section of the trail turns into double track right before it intersects with the 67 road. Don't panic when you see that you're suddenly on a road. You did not miss a turn, I assure you. This is the access road to a few places where the lava tubes that you've been riding on top of this entire time have collapsed and formed entrances. Oh, you didn't know you were riding on top of lava tubes. Yeah, this is all an old lava flow. The reason the trail has been so rough down to this point is because of that old lava flow. And as it cooled, when it was originally formed, there were tubes where liquid lava flowed under the surface, which then drained and left a complex of lava caves. There are 3 places here, by my count, where the roof of some of those caves has collapsed in, allowing some sort of access. This is voiceover trail reviews, though, not voiceover cave reviews, and I personally hate caves. It's the one adventure sport I won't do. I'm too claustrophobic. Also, spelunkers get grouchy when you give away their secrets, so even if I did know anything about these caves, I wouldn't tell you. The whole point is for you to discover for yourself, so here they are, just off the spur on the 67 road. I'm not giving you any more information on how to get here. All I can say is that you'll need actual rock climbing gear to safely enter these. Somebody cut a tree down and dropped it in there and used the branches as a ladder. That is a really stupid idea. Don't try to do this without proper equipment. Have fun. Don't die. The descent gets pretty mellow after the trail crosses the spur road. It's mostly downhill in this section, a little bit pedally, but this is what's kind of cool about the Falls Creek Trail, is that it just feels like you're going on a varied mountain biking journey. Even if you're just shuttling it, the varied terrain, the ups and downs, and just the sheer amount of pedaling you get to do through many different types of forest, and what felt to me like at least 3 climate zones, is one of the things that makes this ride near and dear to so many riders' hearts, including mine. There's one more collapsed lava tube down here about a mile from the road. The pace increases a little bit after that last lava tube, then the trail goes through this series of S-curves before you end up back out on the 67 road, where you came out if you climbed up the way I detailed earlier in the video. Take the main trail down this time, which is located between these trees. Some locals, I don't know if they were locals, some people tore down our sign, and sometimes in the fall you'll see hunters camping out right in front of this trail entrance. This section of trail is the beginning of the reroute Evergreen and Northwest Trail Alliance built about 7 years ago. This top part of the reroute, in my opinion, has terrible flow, and it's not the kind of flow where you'd like overcome it with bike handling. Even if you bring your own flow, you're a bring your own flow type of rider, this section of Falls Creek will ambush you and take that flow back from you. It sort of just meanders through the forest. It's obvious that whoever flagged it was just interested in going from one neat looking feature to the next without any consideration for how the trail would actually ride. So you end up climbing up steep little hills to get to the top of things, then dropping back down into a pit, then climbing another little hill. It's just a bit too much to carry momentum to the top of. It's a lot of unnecessary pedaling that's all grunt, no skill. The reroute crosses this road twice, and if you need a bailout, you can turn right at this second crossing and the road will lead right to the viewpoint and skip over a lot of climbing. But that's no fun. Starting here, the trail will climb about 200 feet over 3/4 of a mile. It's really not that bad. It just seems worse because it's a sustained climbing effort in the middle of a 3,000-foot descent. Soon, the climb pays off as the trail arrives here at the official lunch spot, so named because of the trailside furniture that some of our trail builders have added and maintained over the years. One of the reasons for adding the climb to this reroute was so that we could have the trail arrive at this viewpoint, because this is literally the only exposure on this ride. There's a view over the Falls Creek Falls drainage and then over to Mount Hood. There's often one bar of cell service here at the lunch spot, so if you need to squeeze a text message out to somebody, this is the place to try to do it. Also, it is almost completely downhill from here. Almost. The trail follows the ridge line after the lunch spot for about a 1/4 mile as we tried our best to wring the most views possible out of this and make it worthwhile when we built this. Right after the ridge, things start getting really fun. This is easily one of the funnest, flowiest sections of the Falls Creek Trail, and that is on purpose. It was thoughtfully and intentionally designed to be a lot of fun to ride this section. Right here, there is a glimpse of Mount St. Helens on a clear day, so that way you at least get to see 2 of the mountain peaks when you do this ride. If you brought a timber bell, turn it on after this because this section of trail really shreds. It's short, but it's also a lot of fun. Then it starts climbing for a little bit. It's only 100 feet of elevation gain. It's hardly anything. Then you arrive at this intersection, the same intersection with the old section of the Falls Creek Trail where I took a ride earlier in this video. If you had just wanted to do a straight up out and back, you could have just come up this section of trail that I just came down. Both are valid options. It's just a question of what adventure you'd like to have today. The second funnest descent on this trail starts here as it drops through these tight turns and then descends down this super fun route waterfall. This feature will also confound some beginner to intermediate riders, but keep that in mind. I also keep the timber bell running here as well because this is where I frequently encounter lost hikers wandering around. Be courteous if you do see someone hiking up around here above Bubble Falls and stop to ask them if they do know where the trail goes. Often they wandered up here. They don't realize it's a long hike to nowhere. They might appreciate knowing that the fun part of their hike is over and they can go home. The trail loses about 150 feet over 2 miles going this direction, so it's basically flat with a bunch of roots and rocks, but otherwise pretty insignificant. It's just another part of the journey. The forest is kind of neat. The next downhill section starts here at the top of a Strava segment referred to as Watch Out for Hikers. This is where bikers riding this as an out and back have to get off and push the bike. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of hikers on this very steep and very narrow bench. The only reason you don't see any in this video is because I was riding this on a Tuesday evening. A lot of bikers try to shred this section of trail, and I'm officially scolding anyone who does that because it's extraordinarily dangerous to do so. Quit shredding this segment. Hold back. Stay in control. This intersection with the hiking trail that leads to Falls Creek Falls proper begins yet another downhill segment. Turn right. This last section loses 650 feet of elevation over about 1.5 miles through some of the nicer forest around as it transitions into lower elevation dug fir and underbrush. Shred carefully here too. There are more hikers on this section of trail than higher up. There are some cool sections where you have to try to get through some lava rock gardens without dabbing and a lot of swooping in and out of drainages, some of which are pretty steep. If you can manage to be in the right gear, you might not have to dismount the bike for any of these drainages. Things do start to straighten out a bit as you get closer to the bottom. You should also start to notice the temperature warming up on most days as you descend. Once you see the creek, you're pretty close. Now, to get back to the car, turn right. If you shuttled this and have a third car, you can totally do this twice in a day. Most mortals have just one out and back in them, but definitely 2 shuttles. Either way, stop in Carson, Stevenson, or North Bonneville for some food and a beer on the way home. They all have fine establishments. I'd like to take this moment to thank all my Patreon supporters, especially my Low Me Goodness level sponsors Andy Sewry, Charles Kim, Damon Corey, and Randy Relaford. I'd also like to thank my Hero Dirt level sponsors, earning their special mention at the end of this video: Bryce Ulrich, my newest sponsor, Dave PNW, Devin Young, Edward Lanton, Heather von Valkenburg, and Pedro Cantarini. If you'd like to join this list of patrons of the fine art of YouTube trail reviews, sign up today at patreon.com/voiceovertrails. Now, get out there and go ride your bike.